Okay, I make it 12:03. Welcome to day 2 of Harper McLeod's second annual Marine Economy Week. This week we are focusing on all things marine and maritime, as is the purview of our Marine Economy Group. My name's Chris Kerr. I lead the Marine Economy Group at Harper McLeod. And yesterday, for those who were with me, I chatted to 3 of my colleagues about some of the headlines and themes that we've seen in this sector over the last year or so. We covered a lot of ground, including the ScotWind leasing programme, the developments in aquaculture regulation, as well as other developments such as the Seaweed Harvesting Academy at Oban. But the themes which kept coming up were innovation, sustainability and collaboration. We'll see if that continues today. I hope for those of you who were with me yesterday, it whetted your appetite for the rest of the week, and we're delighted if you're with us either for day 1 or your day 2. I think you're in for a very interesting day 2. Today we're focusing on ports and harbours. This is a topic which appears in my mind certainly to have gained more attention in the last couple of years, whether that be as a result of Brexit, COVID, the knock-on supply chain issues, and of course that was mildly impacted by something that happened in the Suez Canal. So I think there's plenty to talk about. Ports and harbours are shaped by the geography, the industry and the local communities. They're the link between land and sea, and they act as the gateways to the world. They're typically privately owned or set up through trust or statutory body. And they can also be owned by other stakeholders such as local authorities and councils. I would say even for those that have got no connection to ports and harbours, it's difficult to miss what's been going on over the last few years as the amount of investment and diversification that's been going on as they seek to reposition themselves, whether it be for economic activity, climate change or opportunity. And that could be refocusing on regeneration of local communities. It could be refocusing for offshore renewables, attracting tourism, or assisting in the wind down and decommissioning of oil fields. And of course, that's before we talk about the influence of government policy, which we're seeing just now through the introduction of the free port model. So we've got a busy day today. We've got 3 speakers who are going to help us understand more about what's going on in this sector. And the kind of importance of it to our vast marine economy. You're able to log questions in the chat box, and I'll try and pick those up as we go. I will tell you more about the rest of the week once we get to the end of the session. But first of all, we're going to hear from Minister Ivan McKee. I'll come back and introduce him in a second, but we're also going to be joined by Richard Ballantyne, Chief Exec of British Ports Association, Steve Regan, the co-owner of Port of Ardersier. However, I'm delighted to introduce Ivan McKee, Scottish Government Minister for Business, Trade, Tourism and Enterprise. Thank you for joining us, Minister. We're delighted to hear what you've got to say to us in relation to all that is Scottish ports and marine.
Great. Thank you very much, Chris, and thanks very much to Harper McLeod for organising Marine Economy Week and for inviting me to speak. As you can imagine, with my portfolio covering trade, tourism, enterprise business, I'm acutely aware of the crucial role that ports and harbours play in our economy in Scotland. And during the last few years, as you've identified, this has taken on an even greater significance due to the challenges brought about by Brexit and by the pandemic. And how that's challenged global supply chains. And at the same time, of course, we face the global crisis of climate change and nature loss. And through all of this, I have to say the maritime industry has shown real resilience, proven itself integral to ensuring the continued movement of goods and people despite these huge challenges. So I'd just like to start by expressing my gratitude for that resilience shown by Scottish ports during the pandemic. And without that, the impact of those events would have been even more severe. And it's also worth pointing out, I do recognise that the ports across Scotland, of course, experience significant pressure on revenues in this time, and as a consequence on their ports, of course, will be key to helping them switch away from established technologies towards new decarbonised technologies and fuels, and not least in facilitating the growth in the offshore wind and developing tidal wave research. And I congratulate everyone in the industry for constantly demonstrating a very high level of professionalism despite all the challenges, old and new. We have, of course, got a diverse range of ports and harbours in Scotland, and they're, of course, crucial gateways to Scotland and provide a very significant positive economic impact at a local, regional and national level, and play a vital role in creating and maintaining that economic prosperity in coastal and island communities across rural parts of the country, and supporting the movement of goods, people, along with offshore energy, marine tourism. So hugely significant parts of the economy. And of course, the port sector will continue to play that central role in supporting our long-term export growth ambitions, and our target to increase exports to 25% of Scotland's GDP by the end of the decade. So it's vital that Scotland retains and enhances its connections to international markets. So I'd like to also acknowledge the close and valued working relationship the Scottish Government has with the marine sector throughout Scotland, and this has permitted us to have open and frank discussions regarding the issues faced by the industry and how we can work together to improve the prospects for ports and their contribution to Scotland's economy. And more specifically, we recognise that significant contribution the sector makes to the economy punches above its weight compared to the rest of the UK, and Scotland generating 4.3 billion in GVA, 3% of the total Scottish economy, and providing employment for more than 74,000 people. I want to talk about climate change and our ambitious targets for net zero. The fact that the Scottish Government, of course, takes this challenge very seriously and has set some of the world's most ambitious targets for carbon reduction. And that's why we're fully committed to working with the International Maritime Organisation, the European Union, the UK Government, and others to support proposals for reductions in global shipping emissions. We'll always, of course, need to get people and goods from one place to another, but how we do so needs to be greener and, of course, fairer in the future. The key to decarbonisation will, of course, be innovation and developing the use of new technologies and fuels. And those technological advancements will bring benefits to the industry as well as to the environment, communities and people. It's an issue that will hugely impact on international shipping and maritime interests. You cannot ship goods between countries, of course, without secure and safe places to land. And while we recognise the challenge, we must also, of course, seize the opportunities. Decarbonising the maritime industry will create green skills and business opportunities and new technologies. So we recognise the work the IMO is doing to broaden the focus beyond the decarbonisation of ships and the provision of supporting infrastructure. And this, of course, includes looking strategically at shipping routes where technological advances incentivise, and ports and shipping lines are encouraged across states and nations to move with pace and purpose to a decarbonised future. Many countries, of course, including the UK, signed the Clydebank Declaration at COP26 in Glasgow last November, pledging to explore creating green shipping corridors. And we want Scotland to be involved in that exciting work. And the maritime industry can and must accelerate the world's transition from an unsustainable present to a greener and fairer future. Turning to trade links, which, as you would expect, is a subject close to my heart, and ensuring we have strong and established links for exporters to get their goods to market is crucial. 30 million tonnes of goods were exported through Scottish ports last year, despite the pandemic restrictions impacting on markets across the world. And over 250,000 containers are moved annually just through the port of Grangemouth. In addition, there are regular feeder services to ports throughout the UK and EU and globally. And the key is to establish whether existing supply chains are optimal for Scotland's exporters and whether there are opportunities for more commodities to be exported directly from Scotland's ports. And this is something I'm very keen on. I've been meeting directly with port operators and hauliers to explore how Scotland's exporters can have more direct and resilient, increasingly important, of course, the issue of resilience, with more resilient routes to market. I've chaired the stakeholder engagement sessions with key port leaders as well as freight forwarders and logistics companies, and the aim is to gain a better understanding of the size of that opportunity for direct shipments from Scotland, currently get to market, why hauliers choose the routes they do, and understand the current factors limiting direct services from Scottish ports. In that regard, I'm very keen to hear directly from ports if there are things the Scottish Government can do to assist the sector to continue to keep punching above its weight and increasing those direct shipping routes. To drive a sustainable recovery and deliver that just transition to net zero, the Scottish Government is fully committed to delivering green ports in Scotland. And through the Green Freeport programme, our goal is to build clusters of manufacturing excellence in the low carbon industries that will support our overall ambitions for the Scottish economy. And we aim to do this in a way that helps to deliver a just transition to net zero and create fair work opportunities. The Scottish Government's vision for our future economy as we recover from the pandemic is one which is community wellbeing, fair work and progressive decarbonisation at its heart. And I suppose it was with those principles in mind and after careful consideration of the UK Government's Freeport model that we engaged in dialogue with the UK Government about the introduction of a tailored model for Scotland, one which reflects Scotland's requirements and values. Following those constructive conversations with the UK Government, it resulted in an agreement which includes funding equivalent to that made available to three ports in England for Scottish green ports, and ensures a partnership of equals between the two governments as we take this programme forward. So Scotland's green ports will help us to create new high quality skilled jobs, paying of course at least the real living wage. They'll enable further decarbonisation of our economy through their commitment to a net zero transition. They'll attract global trade and investment and of course foster an innovative environment where entrepreneurs can thrive and help drive our future economy. And these objectives, of course, form the basis of what we're expecting from green port applicants. The bidding prospectus was published on the 25th of March at the start of that 12-week application period. It closes on the 20th of June. And following that process, we'll be announcing the winning ports later in the summer. So I'm looking forward to receiving ambitious proposals from applicant ports from across Scotland that will, of course, meet and exceed our very clearly stated objectives. Turning to look at the issue of the blue economy, I'd like to give you a brief update on where we are there, with the Scottish Government increasing our level of ambition, recognising the imperative for change and the opportunities, and of course that's given further impetus by the commitments underlined at COP26. In March this year, the Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs and Islands launched the Scottish Government's Blue Economy Vision, and that sets out our long-term ambition for Scotland's seas and coasts to 2045. It's a bold new framing for the management of our marine environment and sets out Scotland's ambitions for a world-leading blue economy. It promotes an approach that's consistent with Scotland's national performance framework and supports delivery of wider government objectives, including, of course, the just transition to net zero, the biodiversity strategy, and the green economic recovery. That vision demonstrates how much we value our marine environment and its significance, and it's captured in the 6 outcomes that sit across a range of environmental, social, and economic ambitions. And these outcomes were identified to respond to major challenges of our time, including, of course, the climate and nature crisis, COVID-19 and Brexit. So at the heart of Scotland's blue economy approach is the recognition that our economy and society are embedded within nature, and in order to harness blue opportunities, we must transform economy and society to thrive within the planet's limits. And the approach covers all sectors interacting with the oceans, including, of course, Scotland's maritime industries, shipbuilding and repairs, ports, harbours, transport, marine business services, and others. And across the world, we're seeing an increasing number of countries introducing a blue economy approach to better balance those factors in a sustainable way in marine environments. And in taking a more holistic approach to marine management in Scotland, we think we'll be at the forefront of this global movement and able to share our ideas and experiences as we strive towards UN sustainability goals. Adopting this approach also fits very well within our net zero commitments and ambitions to fulfil that just transition. Publication of the vision marks the start of the next phase of work to deliver a collaborative approach for marine-related activity through the development of the Blue Economy Action Plan, which we will work closely with stakeholders on to deliver for Scotland. And we see that the maritime sector has been a vital industry within the blue economy, with huge contributions to the economic outcomes of the approach. And equally, the blue economy will help bolster and boost marine industry, supporting skills, training and development in marine careers. And this will be crucial to enable us to achieve the vision. So the blue economy work is hugely ambitious and exciting for Scotland, and will deliver for all our citizens and communities. And I look forward to the publication of the action plan later this year and seeing its progress over coming years. I mentioned earlier the vital role for ports and the harbours in assisting the transition to that decarbonised future. And of course, one example of that is the Energy Transition Zone, a £184 million business park, which is proposed to be built adjacent to the new Aberdeen South Harbour, has the potential to capitalise on the existing strong energy supply chain located in the northeast of Scotland, supporting the technology and innovation environment, strengthened by the two universities, and the ongoing work, of course, by the Net Zero Technology Centre and the wider industry on net zero solutions. So last summer, the Scottish Government announced that it approved the Energy Transition Zone limited business case and awarded the project £26.3 million. A joint commitment was made by the UK Government, and Opportunity North East is contributing £5.7 million, which takes the funding secured to deliver the Energy Transition Zone to £60 million. So hugely exciting project that we're delighted to be part of. Turning to look at the issue of ferries, we recognise the key role that Lifeline ferry services and associated port infrastructures play in supporting the economic, social and cultural development of our island and remote mainland communities. So in February of last year, the Scottish Government announced an investment of £580 million in ports and vessels to support and improve Scotland's ferry services as part of a wider 5-year infrastructure investment plan. As part of our commitment to our island and remote communities, since 2007, the Scottish Government has invested over £2 billion in the Clyde and the Hebrides ferry services, the Northern Isles ferry services and ferry infrastructure. And this investment includes, of course, new routes, increased frequencies, additional capacity, new vessels, upgraded harbours, as well as the rollout of significantly reduced fares through the road equivalent tariff scheme. And the Scottish Government is on target to achieve its target of 30% of the ferries we own being low or zero emissions by 2032. Scotland has led the world with the introduction of 3 diesel-electric hybrid vehicle carrying ferries, and will work towards the decarbonisation of the ferry service. The new vessels will benefit from the lessons learned and experience gained by CMAL and CalMac from developing and operating what were the world's first diesel-electric hybrid vehicle ferries. And the number of low-emission vehicles will also increase over the next decade via our small vessel replacement programme. And the first phase of this programme will replace up to 7 of the smaller vessels serving the Clyde and Hebrides network with either fully electric or next generation diesel-electric hybrid ships. So our aim is to ensure the next generation of small vessels is as environmentally friendly as possible, and investigations are currently underway in conjunction with utility companies to identify the routes and ports capable of providing the power needed to charge and operate these ferries. We're also keen to see shoreside cold ironing power rolled out as standard on our ferry networks, and new vessels. The major port upgrades include this capability, and we have supported the retrofit of the MV Hamnavo serving Orkney to be able to plug in overnight to Stromness. So for the small vessel replacement programme, consideration has been given to increasing the standardisation of the vessel, designed to allow retrofitting of zero emissions technologies to take place in the future in order to achieve that zero emissions target by 2045. So the challenge for the wider port and shipping sectors to adapt to lower carbon technologies is one we absolutely recognise, and we're working with the UK government on a recent call for evidence on the use of shore-side power at ports. It'd be remiss of me not to touch on Brexit during my remarks to you today, in spite of its negative impact and further future potential problems it may create. I would like to assure you that the Scottish Government will continue to make representations to exporters and importers on our operators' behalf, and been working hard on all the issues Brexit has caused, pragmatically doing all we can to mitigate its harmful effects on the sector. So the Scottish and wider UK ports and harbours industry, we recognise it in conclusion as a busy and vibrant sector. It's vital to economic prosperity. I'm keen to continue to work with the sector to better understand the issues it faces and to determine how the Scottish Government can provide assistance where possible. And my ministerial colleagues and I aim to continue to strengthen the Scottish Government's relationship, not only with our world-class ports, but also with the many and varied businesses and communities that they support. I hope the rest of Marine Economy Week is a success, and your discussions will help to inform future dialogue between government, ports, harbours, and the businesses and communities that rely on. And thanks once again to Harper McLeod for the invitation to speak at the event today. Thank you very much.
Minister, thank you very much. Thank you very much. We battled a little with your line, but I think we got almost 100% of what you said. I think your speech there highlights just the vastness of the sector that we're talking about, but thank you for covering so much of it. I know you need to go in a couple of minutes, Minister, but I think I'm able to ask you a couple of quick questions. Just on the green free ports, for those of our audience who are less familiar with this ongoing discussion and now the bidding competition, is it right to say that we're still expecting the outcome to be 2 green free ports?
Yeah, we're going to have two green ports in Scotland. That's absolutely correct. That process, I'm glad to say, is underway. I don't want to go back over the history, but suffice to say we had some red lines there, but we were very happy that we've secured everything we wanted from those negotiations. So I think the model we're taking forward in Scotland as we look to the future is going to deliver for port operators and those that are going to be successful for Scottish business, for our key growth sectors, and for Scotland's communities and employees and environment. So we're very happy with that. But you see, there's going to be 2 green ports in Scotland, and the winners of the bidding process will be announced later in the summer.
And you may not be able to answer this, but do you have a feel for how many bids you're expecting?
Not directly. I mean, as part of the process, we invited anyone who was interested in the process earlier last year to indicate an expression of interest. I think we've got 10 expressions of interest altogether from ports the length and breadth of Scotland. So I wouldn't know exactly how many of those are taken forward to the next stage, but I would expect there will be a number of very strong bids coming forward, meeting the criteria that we've set out.
Thank you. There was one question coming in the chat function, which goes along the lines of, given the known capacity for the offshore wind and the fact that we know that we're going to need extra laydown assembly construction areas, is there a way in which the government can see themselves being able to speed up the process of identifying those areas now?
In terms of the port infrastructure, well, I mean, there's at the end of the day, developers will work with ports to identify where they want to have that capacity in place, and the supply chain will do likewise. So our job as government is to support and provide as much clarity as we can. I, of course, co-chair SOEC, the Offshore Wind Energy Council, and the various subgroups within SOEC working on supply chain are very important in that regard. Looking at what we can do to speed up the consenting process is an important part of that. The Green Portals being in play in a few months will clarity on there will of course help in the work that the strategic investment assessment took forward. It was very useful in helping to give some perspective on the capabilities that we've got in Scotland and how those could best be deployed. So we're very keen to work as actively as we can with all parts of the sector to get that capacity in place, because the question is absolutely right. The opportunities here are absolutely immense, and we need to all do all we can to realise those to the benefit of Scotland's ports and wider economy.
Excellent. I fear I have taken up more of your time than you expected. So thank you for being with us. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Chris. Really, really good to have a conversation, and see you again soon. Thanks. Bye now.
Thank you. Okay, hopefully you all found that of use, and I think it did just illustrate the scale of the sector and what is on the Minister's desk. Turning to our next speaker, Richard Ballantyne, Chief Exec of the British Ports Association. Richard's been with BPA since I think 2007. For those of you who don't know, it's a UK-wide membership and lobbying body. If anyone is well equipped to tell us about the scale of the sector and the challenges and opportunities currently faced by it, it's Richard. Over to you.
Good morning, everyone, and it's great to be with you for day 2 in a very important week, and thanks very much for the invitation. And it's also great to follow the Minister, who he's a bit, I would say, a bit modest actually. He's one of the better ministers we deal with, and we have a great relationship, I think, with the Scottish ports industry and that particular part of the Scottish government. Had I have had the chance, I would have loved to have asked the Minister about UK content rules and Scottish content and planning conditions being tagged on to things like offshore wind developments, but that's probably one for wider debate. But anyway, I'm going to quickly canter through some general background to the port sector, and then our colleague Steve Regan is going to give you a bit more of probably a bit more kind of detail and quite interesting topic about his particular operation. But I'm going to focus particularly on trade, but we are not going to forget about the very important sectors such as fishing and tourism and, of course, offshore renewables. Just quickly, this is what I describe as the BPA's propaganda, so I won't spend too long on this, but we do represent a big wide range of port operators up and down the UK, and indeed in Scotland, we pretty much represent everyone, apart from the Port of Ardersier, but we're working on that with Steve shortly. So you possibly watch this space, but I won't kind of dwell on that too much. But a lot of Scotland's major ports are already in the BPA, and we have a Scottish Ports Forum, which elects a chair. We have an annual reception in the Scottish Parliament and produce various publications and feed into things like Scottish Government consultations, as well as giving evidence to Scottish parliamentary committees and a range of other sort of network type things. The wider UK network is quite impressive as well. And all those ports come together at a couple of points during the year, and we're looking forward to getting back with our annual conference, which this year is in October in Aberdeen, to see their new development investment up there. So just basically, what do ports do? They're effectively providing that landside interface with the marine sector, and we provide hubs and gateways for international trade, but also for the more traditional industries such as fishing and marine leisure, and also now growth areas in Scotland such as marine tourism, with things like the cruise industry, which we're now hoping will start to recover quite quickly post-COVID with all those travel bans, but also facilitating millions of people on lifeline ferry services as well, which is a very important part of that regional and rural economy. We're effectively going to grow as a sector. So unlike things like aviation, which has had its wings clipped, pardon the pun, somewhat in the last couple of years, the ports industry and freight is growing, notwithstanding trade issues such as leaving the European Union or other issues such as problems with supply chains that followed COVID, and also now as a result of the situation in Ukraine with Russian sanctions, we do have quite an ambitious growth expectation. Predominantly it's UK-wide, but there are good areas of growth in Scotland, particularly around offshore renewables. So very pleased that Steve's going to fill us in on that particular area after my short presentation. Unitised traffic, so that's containers and ro-ro, that's set to grow. Scotland's largest container port is Grangemouth. There are aspirations, as the Minister, I think he downplayed somewhat, but there are aspirations to explore establishing a new ferry service linking the continent of Europe with Scotland again, as it's been some years since the DFDS Rosyth service closed. But that is an aspiration, and I think there will be demand. It's just we've got to find that business case for it to take off. Over the last year, we're an independent sector. We don't get directly, anyway, we don't get direct funding from the government, from the UK or the Scottish government, apart from on a sort of a random basis, either sort of fishing grants or occasionally there's offshore renewables, subsidies, etc. And other kind of loans occasionally are channeled our way. But for the most part, the port sector is independent and self-financing, either borrowing from investors or using its own resource to build and invest. And over the last 2 years, or even less, in so 18 months or so, it's 1.2 billion of private investment the sector has secured up and down the UK. There are three main types of port model, although that's somewhat blurred with some of the publicly owned port infrastructure that services our ferries on the west coast of Scotland, for example. But those are private, so the likes of Clyde Ports and Forth Ports and ABP Air and Troon are that private model. Municipal, so that's government-owned, local government-owned. We have some big players in the oil and gas sector, the Shetlands councils, the Orkney councils, etc. I have good big facilities in the Northern Isles, but also we have a lot of smaller harbours that have fallen into local authority ownership that are managed for that sort of community asset. And the final and perhaps most unusual entity is the trust ports, so the likes of Aberdeen and Peterhead and Montrose and Cromarty, etc. in Inverness. It's quite a long list of independent trusts. They are, again, private sector in style, but they have some public expectations, public accountability, for example, but all ports are governed by the statute if they're statutory harbours, and they're all competing against one another effectively, but just three stroke four subtle different types of models there. So where's all the activity in business? And you'll see there's quite a lot of concentrated on the south and east coast of the UK, particularly close to the continent of Europe. But we also have some big hubs in Scotland, of course. And indeed, what sets Scotland apart from the rest of the UK is Scotland is a net exporter, which is quite important and very impressive for our economy. And you'll see Forth there, big exports of liquid bulk and oil products, as well as containers. Glen Sander is one that not everybody knows about, but that's a big quarry on the west coast, chipping out granite from a beautiful scenery and shipping it all over the world. I think it's about 6 or 7 million tonnes annually. And you'll see in the Orkneys and Sullom Voe up in the Shetlands, the focus there on oil and gas products. But that doesn't tell the full story. And the top 10 list there, which I think only has one Scottish port on, that doesn't tell the full story, because we do have very strong players in the offshore support sector, where we're not measuring sort of cargo or quantity, but we are still seeing huge amounts of vessel arrivals and marine activities, and ultimately jobs and investment. So those jobs and investments, what are they? There's a list on the right there. It's 115,000 jobs around the UK indirectly. I would suggest, although there's a strong link between some of those terminals and facilities and the ports. So the minister mentioned, I think he mentioned around 70,000 jobs in Scotland. I think the number we use is about 38,000, but there's lots of different ways of measuring these things, as of course. And it's impressive per head of population in Scotland, both tonnage and number of people employed. It's that coastal history I think Scotland has, with lots of urban areas around the coast, still employing people involved in either traditional or new maritime sectors. And those list of jobs there, I mean, there's some traditional ones there, such as harbour masters, etc., port engineers. We are looking at how automisation, digitalisation, etc., and development of our infrastructure is going to change that, because I think it's fair to say that some of our diversity issues and demographics aren't great in comparison with other jobs, but the advent of technology and digitalisation or automisation, I think, is going to bring in a new generation of port workers, much more diverse workers across the sector. So I think it's an exciting time for ports over the next 10 years or so. The Minister mentioned free ports, and is absolutely obviously right. There is a process underway in Scotland, but before that, in England, we've got 8 sites being designated, 7 at seaports, 1 East Midlands Airport, inland, etc. And these are effectively zones of business-friendly regulatory rules and conditions. And I think the big thing that was brought into these zones was tax benefits. So things like capital allowance for building projects, also reduced national insurance contributions for certain workers for up to 3 years, as well as things like business rates waivers. That's really helpful for getting people to come in and invest and build. And that is something that I think we are keen to see rolled out elsewhere, so not just at free ports. We don't want to be, kind of a race to the bottom, cutting standards, etc. But the way that these tax incentives can work is really can stimulate investment, particularly things like capital allowances, where people can come in and do things quicker, cheaper, etc. We've got some sites operating already. There's a list on the right. You can find more details online, including on our website. But I think collectively, I mentioned on the previous slide, 115,000 jobs across the sector. These ports, these 8 between them, are proposing to add around 215,000 additional jobs. So even more than triple the amount of jobs, I think, ultimately for the wider ports industry. Now, whether or not they distort trade is a big debate, and whether or not they pull investment away from existing port operations, I think is kind of in part accepted. Although some of that investment will be pulled away from other locations, such as Scandinavia and continental Europe and the Republic of Ireland, potentially. But it is something that we're very mindful of as an association. If you think back to my opening slide, we have over 400 ports up and down the UK. Now, some of them aren't going to be suitable for these type of operations, but there is a long tail of ports who, could certainly create a business case for more investment and more development of trade or other maritime activity links, which some of these stimulus would help. So it is definitely one to watch. Just quickly, Chris, a couple more extra slides. Just quickly, some of what's on our in tray in the port sector. And I haven't talked too much about things like Russian sanctions or P&O ferries, where there are sort of new legislation, but I can come to that if anybody wants to. But sustainability, as ever, is the big thing for us moving out of COVID, and I'll touch on COVID in a second. But you can see, air quality and our sort of environmental footprint next to our stakeholders, whether they're port communities, is a big issue. And one of the proposals from government is that ports should invest in things like shore power facilities to plug ships in, so they don't burn their engines whilst at berth. But that is quite an expensive thing to do. It's not something we'll do overnight. We also need some wider infrastructure. And that is one area where we are looking for government support potentially. But yeah, the list of environmental issues goes on. I mentioned COVID briefly. We did keep going during the pandemic. 1 or 2 passenger services at ports were obviously shut down, but the sector survived. We weren't sort of embraced with a lot of insolvencies, etc. Although it was a tough time for a lot of ports and their tenants, etc. But we kept going. But there have been 1 or 2 issues with supply chain since, although predominantly that's the sort of deep sea container market, which runs into the south and east coast of England. But you may have seen headlines there. I mentioned the investment over the last 18 months or so. That's just a list of some of the projects. And right at the top, both of that list alphabetically, but also in terms of value, is the investment going on at the Port of Aberdeen, where they're building a new South Harbour for the offshore industry. And it's an amazing site and, quite an exciting time. Now all they've got to do is fill it up with customers, of course. That's the easy part, so to speak. But they're on it and they're doing a lot. And if you're interested in learning more, have a look at their website. And indeed, you can get up to a nice visitor centre to have a look at the new facility. There's also, a range of different ports there. There's a good range indeed, and even covering dredging right at the bottom for Felixstowe to develop to allow the largest container vessels to get into Felix, etc. But you'll see there's a couple there, Leith, etc., and some from Forth ports. So it's across the sector, and we're doing well. So that's all for me, Chris. So I'm here for questions if there are any, and thanks very much again.
Excellent. Thanks, Richard. That was really good. I'm going to kick us off. You mentioned automation. You just give us a sense of where do the UK ports sit in terms of where they're at in the automation curve compared to other ports around the world?
Yeah, I think probably we're ahead of most around the world, but probably not ahead of the competing nations we want to be ahead of, if that makes sense, because we are obviously a developed country. The UK port sector is, understandably, I would say, quite conservative, and it's quite commercial. So it can't invest in some of the things that those ports, for example, in continental Europe, have municipal or local government support to incentivise, etc. But we're doing our best, and you're finding there's probably kind of pockets of investment in various technologies, etc. But it's a gradual process, not a sudden one. Quite often when port operators acquire things like plant or machinery, they do it on a long-term basis. And you'll find, this is particularly the case for when we're looking at kind of getting rid of diesel in the in cranes, for example, or plant and machinery at ports. A lot of ports have acquired those things probably 10, 15 years ago, and they might have expected to get 20 or even sometimes 30 years out of those pieces of equipment. That's their investment. And to suddenly have to invest in greener technology or self-loading machinery, etc., I think that can be a problem. Equally, we have seen kind of bits and pieces at various ports, self-loading of aggregates. I was kind of looking at over down at the Port of Tyne, and there's also now a kind of strong move to explore the legal ramifications as well as the physical sort of operational impacts of things like autonomous vessels, perhaps initially at a kind of smaller scale with sort of hydro vessels looking at sort of scanning seabeds, etc. first, but eventually looking at kind of short sea freight and cargo vessels. But yeah, it's we're not kind of the finished article in the UK, but there's examples, I would say.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Okay, I'm conscious you need to get off the call in a couple of minutes, Richard, and also just time generally, but I can't let you drop off without giving a plug for your portcasts. For those who are interested in hearing more, the BPA's website has got some really interesting information on there. Slight play on words, portcasts.
I don't know. I don't know if some people like to listen to them and send them to sleep, Chris. So I don't know what that means. Kind of nod you off in the evening. But
used for a purpose.
We'll do some more, and who knows, Steve. I might be contacting Steve as being a special guest because I think we're due a new run this year. So watch out for Steve potentially doing a broadcast.
Right, Richard. Thank you very much for that.
Thanks so much.
Just you can stay on or drop off as you need to. But I'm going to move on to Steve Regan, as I said in my intro, co-owner of the Ardersier Port facility since last year. Steve and his business partner have got big plans for bringing back to life the facility at Ardersier just east of Inverness. Which has got an interesting history but hasn't been in use for some years. Steve, looking forward to it.
Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to quickly run through some slides regarding, the transformative role that ports and harbours can play in our green industrial revolution. So first, want to sort of walk through sort of how we got to where we are today. So, we know we have a massive net zero opportunity for Scotland. Scotland's commitments have surpassed that of the UK and a number of parts of Europe. And the commitment that we now have from all government policy to accelerating the green industrial revolution, especially over the last 18 months, with what's happened around the world, obviously accumulated in the sort of tragic circumstance that we have today, have really sort of laser focused the issues that we face about securing our energy sources. That was also consolidated by the award of the ScotWind 1 leasing round for Crown Estate, where of the original sort of 10 gigawatts that was discussed, they actually awarded 24.8 gigawatts. So we're sitting on a massive opportunity here in Scotland to lead the way in terms of how we tackle this. Just to sort of summarise the scale of what ScotWind 1 means to those of you who may not be into the details. So 17 development sites were awarded by the Crown Estate, with an 18th currently being cleared, equating to 24.8 gigawatts of renewable electricity. Of that, around 9.7 gigawatts is going to be of fixed bottom technology, which is the sort of standard, been the standard method for the last 10 years, with 15 gigawatts devoted to the new technology of floating wind generation. As you can see, a variety of consortium and developers, consisting of major oil and gas operators, massive energy companies, as well as sort of blended relationships there, have been successful for these options. As Scotland, we now have the challenge of how do we deliver all of these projects. This slide here gives you an idea of where we currently have operational offshore wind farms developed around Scotland, as well as those that have been awarded in the ScotWind round leasing. So as you can see, it covers every coast. And the scale of some of these developments range from 3 gigawatts to smaller ones that are around 500 megawatts. To put some sort of perspective on how big is a floating wind turbine. So each of the turbines that are going to be deployed in the floating fields will generally generate between 15 and 20 megawatts of electricity. They will stand 300 meters high. So this is the height of one of the ultra high skyscrapers that we see in maybe London, like the Shard, and the base comprises around 12 to 15,000 tonne of ballast that effectively floats. Each of these fields will have between 80 and potentially 100 of these individual turbines in them. So when you sort of work that back to the scale of the facilities that are required to construct these, if we are going to deliver local content and we're not going to be importing these from other parts of the world, it brings into perspective the sort of massive demand challenges that we're going to face in Scotland. And if we don't have the facilities that can build these mega structures, then the work will go elsewhere. It's as simple as that. So the role of ports and harbours in supporting this massive development pipeline is really the sort of four facets that can be sort of individually described. So first we have the role of operations and maintenance. So this is where a port will host effectively the lifetime O&M of the project. It will transfer the crew. You have a small base carrying out daily routine. So a real sort of long-term consistent investment where it'll bring some real good input and valuable jobs. There'll be crew transfer base, marine control centre, that kind of activity for the duration, which will be 20, 30 years lifetime of the field before it's renewed. We then have marshalling and assembly. So marshalling and assembly is really what we've been doing over the last 10 years, where effectively we consolidate, we host. So here a port hub will host deliveries of blades from a manufacturer, the noncells, which are the generators from another manufacturer, the towers from another manufacturer. And it will effectively consolidate all of these deliveries in a large open storage area, which will be very sensitive to its distance from the project site, and then as the erection campaign starts, they'll effectively pick them up from there and deliver them. We then have fabrication and manufacturing. So again, traditionally, in the last 10 years, this has all been taken overseas, especially for the foundations. So here, foundations will be fabricated in Asia, Middle East, again, brought to laydown areas in the UK, again, consolidated and combined with the marshalling and assembly of the wind components, and then taken to the destination port. The recent SOEC report issued last year that the Minister referred to as really focused on a missed opportunity for Scotland, and we firmly believe that by taking sort of the steps recommended in that report, we can ensure that we don't make that same mistake in response to what's been delivered with ScotWind. And lastly, we have major port hubs where we have co-located marshalling, assembly, fabrication, and manufacture. So again, this doesn't exist currently in the United Kingdom. Currently, the nearest comparable examples will be Exburg in Denmark and Rotterdam in Holland. But this holistic approach, where we sort of combine collaborative effort between different ports within a reasonable geographic area, is, I suppose, the sort of the utopia for offshore wind developers, where they can bring all of their materials to one place. They can manufacture materials and then consolidate it directly for their projects. Just to give you a rough idea of scale, the minimum size of a major port hub will be circa 300 acres to service one offshore wind project. So the scale is a big challenge with this. So there's been lots and lots of research, as you can imagine, about how we respond to delivering the ScotWind programme, and this is an extract from an ARUP report that was published back in 2020, where effectively they looked at UK capacity, they looked at the projected growth, which was I suppose the older projections, where we was only delivering 10 gigawatts of ScotWind, and what we have now and what we need, and the estimate back in 2020 is that we need another 290 hectares of port area to allow us to deliver 60% of local content with ScotWind. It's nearly a 600% increase in what we have today. Massive uphill challenge. The strategic investment assessment, which was published by SOAC, which is the Scottish Offshore Wind Energy Council, did a real deep dive in looking back at the challenges that we've faced. In the last 10 years, only around 1/10 of the projects that have been planned and have been delivered. And the local content aspects of that, none of the aspirations have been met. So, there's been a real focus on missed opportunities, and the recommendations that we see are effectively the route map that we must engage with to allow to ensure that we don't miss them opportunities again. So again, that involves members exploring appropriate models, learning lessons from other sectors, collaborating with other between leaseholders and industry to ensure that there's not a sort of massive rush. The projects are timed, everything falls into place to deliver a real good consistency with the work. Priority infrastructure investment. Without the infrastructure, there is no project, because the economics of some of especially the larger floating floating projects require massive port infrastructure within reasonable distance of the projects. And again, just generally bringing the industry together to solve a problem, because if we rely on government or private sector, it'll be hard. It takes a real plan and collaborative approach to make all this happen. So here we have last week the Crown Estate published the commitments that were made by the successful bidders from ScotWind on how much they will effectively deliver in local content. And there was a minimum commitment level, and then a ambitious commitment level where effectively they can almost stretch their targets of investment in Scotland. So here we see the size of the prize. So just on the 24 gigawatts, a minimum of 20 billion, this is billion pounds, being invested in Scotland, creating long-term sustainable manufacturing solutions and jobs, increasing to just over 30 billion in the optimistic scenario. Again, each of the developers, their commitments were published, so they can be held to account, hopefully, on delivering on them commitments. And this investment is in infrastructure, manufacturing, and providing the facilities we need to deliver these projects. So thinking differently, when Arup undertook their review of all of the potential port constraints back in 2020, they highlighted that they challenged us really, and suggested that we need to think differently, use ingenuity to make the most of our natural resources to build a much more sustainable future. And this is where we begin to start thinking about the circular economy. So, what is the circular economy? So the linear economy is where we buy something, we use it, and then we throw it in the bin at the end of its life. Okay. The recycling economy is where we buy something, we use it, we get to recycle some bits of it, but then we throw away the rest. The circular economy is where, when we're designing our system, we rethink how we will, reuse, repair, recycle, manufacture, and remanufacture at the end of its life, which again minimises the amount of waste that's generated by that system perpetually. Once we fix the circular economy, we no longer have resource or commodity issues. At Ardersier Port, we've decided to embrace them principles, and as well as understanding the solution that we need to provide in terms of mass production manufacturing areas for the manufacturers and the developers, we decided to engage a system within the projects on the facility to allow us to make the most of the natural assets that we have in Scotland, and waste that we can currently see and forecast is being generated. So here we plan to use circular economy practices within the facility, accommodating multiple complementary work streams, from the decommissioning of oil and gas assets, recycling of wind turbines, producing sustainable aggregates and concrete, large-scale manufacturing, floating wind substructures, green steel manufacturing, offshore wind logistics and fabrication, as well as sustainable energy production. So that all sounds like quite a bit of a mouthful, but how do we plan to deliver this? At Ardersier Port, currently it's a 450-acre fabrication yard that has been shut since 2001. Previously, it was a mass production base for the oil and gas industry from the 1970s, and has built some of the most iconic structures that we see out operating in the North Sea. So here we have a large area where we can bring together a number of complementary industries to, again, support the energy system of the future. So one of the big constraints we have in Ardersier is a dredging operation. We currently started a 4 million tonne dredging campaign, and that material is being brought to the land and being stored, so we can store it and use it for constructing structures in the future. On site in Ardersier, we'll build a cement production factory making a cementitious product from recycled materials as well as cement. And by combining that with all of the aggregates that we've naturally reclaimed, effectively we have all of the ingredients we need to make concrete. That factory will be powered by a waste energy plant, again producing renewable energy. We'll bring oil and gas assets to Ardersier. Currently, the majority of oil and gas assets being retired from the North Sea get sent to other facilities in Europe. So here we're building a bespoke facility, so we can clean the assets. Lots of them are quite highly contaminated. All of the waste residues that we remove from the assets will dispose of inertly through our waste energy process, and the raw materials from the assets will recover. We'll recover the scrap metals. We'll recover the non-ferrous metals. The metals then go into steel manufacturing process. So this is a steel plant which is powered by electricity. The electricity will be a direct feed from existing offshore wind farms. So effectively it will be off-grid and sustainable. And the scrap metal effectively gets recycled into a product that can be used in the construction of new structures. On land here, we have the size and the space to assemble these new structures. And as I explained, the requirements for a typical manufacturer, typically making around 50 of these bases each year, is around 100 acres. They have a massive area required to construct each of these. Size of them around 55 metres square, 18 metres high, again weighing around 12,500 tonne. So once the bases are constructed on site, they get then launched into the channel. All of the towers, nacelles, blades erected, the consolidated on site, and then towed out to the location of the site. So again, the operating model, whilst we're a port at Ardersier, we see ourselves really as a place for industry and a place for manufacturing. So all of the opportunities we're considering here are based on long-term impact. As an example, a consolidation project may last 12 months, a manufacturing factory lasts 25, 30 years. So it's real good, stable employment. We will employ the Fair Work Employment Charter that the Minister referred to, and it will be in place for all businesses working on the ports. The circular model allows for that long-term stability. We don't have the ebbs and flows of short-term work. And lastly, by repurposing our energy system of the past, combining that with local natural resources, we're able to manufacture our energy system of the future. So we protect ourselves. We protect ourselves against commodity prices all around the world impacting our ability to develop our path to net zero. So hopefully I'm not taking up too much of the time. I know we're 5 minutes over, Chris. And yeah, thank you.
Steve, thank you. That was great. Always good to have a case study to bring things to life. Just one question, and that is practically every conversation I'm having at the moment, irrespective of sector, bumps into the issue of skill shortages in people. What's your thoughts on just skills required for the scale of the opportunity here, and how optimistic you are around that?
For me, skills are key, but how do you attract somebody, or retrain somebody to come into your new sector? First is you need to be able to give them a future. You need to be able to have a long-term, stable future. If we're offering training into short-term opportunities, then people will think twice. If we're building a factory that's going to be there for 25 years, we can train generationally train people that know they have a job in that factory for 25 years. So for me, it's how you create the employment is really, really important, as opposed to just setting up a model that is driven by sort of short-termism or other market forces. So by attracting industry and manufacturing, we by de facto attract long-term, good quality job opportunities. And what better place to live than the Highlands?
That's what I was about to say. It would be terrific for the area as well. So, okay, Steve, thank you very much for that. Conscious of time, thank you very much to our audience Hope you've taken something from our 3 speakers today. I thought that was fascinating. We covered an awful lot. If you're interested in more, tomorrow is Innovation Day. And one of my partners, Jamie Watt, is talking to one of our Norwegian clients who's involved in aquaculture innovation, and they're going to be talking about all things relating to that innovation process. Recordings are going to be made available after the end of the week of each of our 5 sessions. And just to remind you, Thursday this week is offshore renewables, and Friday is coming back to that point about skills. It's about marine skills and resources. So meantime, conscious of the time, it's 13:07. Enjoy your lunch and see you again tomorrow. Thank you.